If you like our video, click the button to subscribe to our channel and get easy access to new content. To see our full suite of ad-free video courses, instruction manuals, and quick reference guides, visit us at www.teachucomp.com. The Object Selection tool in Photoshop helps you automatically select an object in an image. The Object Selection tool lets you either automatically select an object Photoshop detects in an image with a single click by using its Object Finder mode, or draw a selection area within which to make Photoshop find an object. This tool helps you select an object in an image when there are multiple objects in the image. The object selection tool in Photoshop has been improved since its initial release, and it often makes the correct object selection in photos. However, even if it doesn't make the same precise initial selection that you could, it is a quick and easy way to create an initial selection in an image, which you can then quickly refine using the Select and Mask workspace if needed. The time saving value of this easy to use tool is its greatest asset. To use the Object Selection tool in Photoshop, click the Object Selection tool button in the Tools panel. The Object Selection tool shares the same button in the Tools panel with the Quick Selection tool and Magic Wand tool, and the button shows the icon for the last tool selected. So, if needed, make sure you select the Object Selection tool by clicking and holding down on this button, and then selecting the Object Selection tool choice from the side menu that appears. Next, click to select the layer in the Layers panel that contains the object to select. This is very important when using the Object Selection tool, as this tool determines the selection shape only from the pixels within the selected layer by default, unless you check the Sample All Layers checkbox in the Options Bar Control panel, which we'll examine momentarily. To show a drop down menu of saved tool presets from which you can choose if you created any for the Object Selection tool, click the Click to open the Tool Preset Picker button at the left end of the Options Bar control panel. To choose a selection setting button to use for your selection, click either the New Selection, Add to Selection, Subtract from Selection, or Intersect with Selection button in the Options Bar control panel. This choice determines how the selection you are about to make interacts with any existing active selections in the Photoshop document. To use the default Object Finder mode of the Object Selection tool to click to select an object in the layer, ensure the Object Finder checkbox in the Options Bar control panel is checked. Then hover over the object to select in the image. If Photoshop recognizes it as a selectable object, the object's overlay then appears. Then click the object in the layer to automatically select it. To toggle showing all the selectable objects in the layer on or off, click the Show All Objects, hold N to toggle Preview Mode button in the Options Bar control panel. To set the options for the Object Finder in Photoshop, click the Set Additional Options button in the Options Bar control panel to show a drop-down panel of tool options. To enable object subtraction, which lets you subtract image areas which appear as small objects within a region you define in an existing object selection by clicking and dragging a selection border around them when using the Subtract from Selection mode. Ensure the Object Subtract checkbox in the drop-down panel is checked. If unchecked, when you click and drag to select an area to remove from an object selection when using the Subtract from Selection mode, all pixels within the selection area are removed instead. To change the refresh mode of the Object Finder in Photoshop, select either the Auto Refresh or Manual Refresh button as needed in the drop-down panel. To manually look for new objects within a selected layer, if you select the Manual Refresh option, click the Click to Refresh Object Finder button in the Options Bar control panel. For example, you may need to do this after selecting a new layer within which to look for objects in the Layers panel. To let Photoshop automatically refresh these results as needed, leave the default auto refresh option selected instead. To change the appearance of the object overlays when using the Object Selection tool in Photoshop, use the options in the Overlay Options section of this drop-down panel. To set the color of the overlay, select a choice from the color drop-down in the panel. To set the outline of the overlay, click the Outline drop-down in the panel and then use the slider that appears to set its value, or type it directly into the outline field instead. To set the opacity of the overlay, click the Opacity drop-down in the panel and then use the slider that appears to set its value, or type it directly into the opacity field instead. To set the overlay display options on screen, select either the Auto Show Overlay, Always Show Overlay, or Never Show Overlay option button in the panel as desired. The default is Auto Show Overlay, which only shows the overlay when you hover your mouse pointer over it. To close the Object Finder Options panel after setting the desired options, click the Set Additional Options button in the Options Bar Control panel to close the drop-down panel of tool options. Alternatively, to use the Object Selection tool in Photoshop, to select objects in an image by drawing a selection area within which to look for objects, choose the Selection tool to use from the Mode drop-down in the Options Bar Control panel. You can select either the Rectangle choice, which is the default and works like the rectangular marquee tool, or Lasso, which works like the Lasso tool. Then click and drag to draw a selection area that completely covers the area in the image within which you want Photoshop to look for the object to select. Areas outside the selection area are not selected. When you release the mouse button, Photoshop then attempts to select the object within the selected area. Note that this is the same method you can use to remove objects from selections when using the Object Selection tool in Photoshop with the Object Subtract option enabled and the Subtract from Selection mode enabled, as previously mentioned earlier in this lesson. This helps you quickly refine selection edges and corners and crevices of selected objects if needed. To do this, click and drag a selection border that completely covers the object in the existing selection to remove. Photoshop then examines the selection and tries to remove the object from the selected area. Often this is useful for removing shadows from corners in selections that the initial selection didn't remove once you zoom in closer to inspect the initial selection. To force the Object Selection tool to sample pixel data from all visible layers instead of the selected layer in the Layers panel when using the tool, check the Sample All Layers checkbox in the Options Bar Control panel. If unchecked, which is the default, Photoshop only looks for objects in the selected layer in the Layers panel. To enforce hard edges when making selections using the Object Selection tool in Photoshop, which reduces the fringe or blur at the edge of the selections, check the Hard Edge checkbox. Alternatively, to add border fringe at the edge of the selection, uncheck this checkbox. Remember to click the subscribe button to see more of our videos. See our full suite of courses, instruction manuals, and quick reference guides at www.teachucomp.com.